The lights hit every inch of that courtroom-sized press conference room, and for a moment, it didn't feel like the entertainment world. It felt like Washington, like Wall Street, like the kind of place where powerful empires come to explain how they slipped. Because when federal agents raided Sean Diddy Combs' homes in Los Angeles and Miami, the world didn't just pause, it stopped. The headlines crashed in like thunder. The images were everywhere. Helicopters overhead, armored vehicles rolling down quiet streets, agents in tactical gear stepping out with boxes and bags. For a man who built an entire kingdom on glamour, confidence, and spectacle. The spectacle now belonged to someone else. And suddenly, everyone was asking the same question. How did it get here? For years, the rumors floated beneath the surface of the industry. Whispers of controlling behavior, violent outbursts, wild parties that blurred into something darker. But they were whispers, nothing more. Then came the civil lawsuits, one after another. Stories that started sounding eerily similar. A pattern that was no longer hiding in shadow but standing in front of a judge in black and white. Accusations of assault, coercion, manipulation, intimidation. Some claims were old, some new, some settled, some still open. But one thing was clear. Once the first lawsuit landed, more voices stepped forward. And when those voices got loud, the federal government started listening. Because this wasn't just celebrity drama anymore, this was agencies, investigators, subpoenas, surveillance, sworn statements. This was the kind of national attention that no PR team could fix. And as the world watched, as the allegations stacked and the investigations deepened, one truth became impossible to ignore. The fall of a legend doesn't begin with a crash. It begins with a crack, and the cracks were finally showing. When the first lawsuit against Sean Diddy Combs hit the public in late 2023, most people thought it would be just another celebrity headline loud for a weekend, forgotten by Monday. But the impact was different this time. It felt heavier, more calculated, more sobering. The complaint was long, detailed, and deeply personal. Filed by Cassie Ventura, someone the public knew had been close to him for years. When she described years of alleged abuse, coercion, threats, and a lifestyle that bordered on psychological captivity, the entertainment world flinched. It wasn't the kind of allegation you brush off with a statement or a denial. It had weight, it had history, and even though the case was settled within 24 hours, the speed of that settlement didn't bury the story, it amplified it. Because settlement or not, the filing cracked open a door that had been locked for decades. Behind that door were stories, and suddenly, people who had been silent for years stepped forward. Another lawsuit, then another, then more. Former associates, former partners, unnamed plaintiffs, public plaintiffs. Some cases described violence, some sexual assault, some manipulation, some trafficking-like environments. Others focused on emotional and psychological intimidation. Each story carried its own weight, its own trauma. But together they began forming a portrait of a man who had spent decades surrounded by unchecked power. Some claims were recent. Some reached back to the 1990s. Some plaintiffs described incidents that allegedly happened in private rooms, studio offices, luxury hotels, or during industry trips where security assistants and insiders were always present but never intervened. Suddenly, every rumor people once shrugged off was being revisited with a different lens. And as these lawsuits multiplied, the atmosphere around Diddy shifted. What was once a carefully curated empire began to look like a fortress protecting something darker. For years, the myth of Diddy was built on charm, success, showmanship, and influence. But now more individuals were stepping out of the shadows with similar patterns of alleged behavior: explosive temper, extreme control, violent outbursts, degrading acts, and moments of rage that were whispered about in industry circles but never formally challenged. These weren't isolated claims from one disgruntled person. These came from different directions, different time periods, different relationships, different corners of his life. As the claims gained traction, federal authorities watched. Because civil lawsuits alone don't trigger raids. It takes a buildup, patterns, evidence, allegations serious enough to suggest something bigger might be hiding underneath. And behind the scenes, investigators began connecting dots that had never been lined up before. Financial movements, corporate structures, travel logs, communications, settlements, NDAs, people closely associated with Diddy who had suddenly gone quiet. Individuals who had worked within his circle reaching out to lawyers for their own protection. Agents don't kick down doors unless they believe there's reason to look inside. Then came the moment nobody expected. Federal raids on his homes in Miami and Los Angeles. Tactical agents, armored vehicles, the kind of operation that looked more like a national security sweep than a celebrity investigation. That morning, neighbors woke to helicopters circling and streets blocked off. The public watched footage of agents carrying out boxes, bags, computers, hard drives, electronic devices, and storage units. For investigators to take that much material, they weren't looking for one thing, they were looking for threads. Anything that could support or contradict the allegations now stacking in court filings. To the outside world, it looked like a criminal enterprise had just been cracked open. To Diddy's side, it was an overreach, a spectacle, a public humiliation not justified by the accusations. But to federal investigators, it was step one in figuring out whether the allegations were isolated acts or part of something systematic. After the raids, public pressure exploded. Every old rumor resurfaced. Every past relationship was scrutinized. Every controversial incident from his past, fights, altercations, violence, disputes was revisited with fresh curiosity. People asked why so many stories over the years had been brushed aside, why so many settlements had been paid, why so many insiders claimed the same patterns of fear and intimidation. Through all of this, Diddy maintained his innocence. His legal team repeatedly denied the allegations, calling them fabrications, opportunistic attacks, or rewritten history. They emphasized there was no criminal charge, no formal indictment, no conviction. They reminded the public that accusations are not guilt, and in the United States, that presumption still stands. But the court of public opinion is not bound by the rules of criminal procedure. As more lawsuits surfaced, the conversation shifted from celebrity scandal to possible systemic abuse. Journalists began analyzing old interviews, old behavior, old industry stories. Bodyguards, assistants, and former associates spoke to reporters about environments where Diddy allegedly controlled everything from who entered a room to what people wore to how long they stayed. Some described unpredictable moods, explosive moments, threats, broken objects, and nights that blurred into chaos. Others defended him fiercely, insisting he was intense but not predatory, powerful but misunderstood, a perfectionist who sometimes went too far but never crossed the lines being alleged. Still, the lawsuits kept coming. It became clear that part of what made the situation so dramatic was Diddy's legacy. He wasn't just any celebrity. He was one of the most powerful figures in hip-hop history, a man who built megastars, shaped a generation, and influenced the entire music business. His empire included fashion, television, beverages, branding, education programs, and philanthropic work. He was the blueprint for entrepreneurship in hip-hop, the symbol of making it out of nothing and becoming everything. But the higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. By early 2024, the entertainment world was bracing itself. Labels distanced themselves. Brands quietly removed his name from projects. Schools and organizations paused partnerships. Business deals were reviewed. Former friends stepped back. A cultural shift was happening in real time. A man once celebrated for power now stood in the crosshairs of accountability, and through it all, investigators continued their work, methodical, quiet, patient, because civil lawsuits tell one story, but federal investigations tell another. One is loud, one is silent, one unfolds in public, the other unfolds behind locked doors with evidence nobody sees until it becomes unavoidable. The world waited, plaintiffs waited, supporters waited, skeptics waited, and at the center of the storm, Diddy stayed mostly silent as the machinery of legal scrutiny spun faster around him. Because this was no longer a question of celebrity drama. This was the beginning of a reckoning. As 2024 unfolded, the investigations surrounding Sean Diddy Combs started taking on a life of their own. What began with a handful of lawsuits started expanding into something far larger. Something that involved not just plaintiffs and attorneys, but federal agencies, specialized units, and cross-state coordination. The public didn't see the day-to-day movement, but legal experts recognized the signs. When multiple agencies begin circling the same subject, there's usually a larger picture forming behind the scenes. Inside the entertainment industry, whispers grew louder. Executives discussed the situation in private meetings, weighing the risks of continuing partnerships. Lawyers were brought into boardrooms, not to discuss new deals, but to analyze exposure. Every brand linked to Diddy, fashion, fragrance, alcohol, media was suddenly asking whether their association could become a legal liability. Publicly, they said little, but quietly, they were making moves. Contracts were reviewed. Clauses were activated. Future collaborations were paused or reshaped. Some partners took a step back entirely. The message was clear. Nobody wanted to get caught in the blast radius of whatever might come next. Meanwhile, more people began speaking out, some publicly, some anonymously. Former employees described high-pressure environments, where loyalty was everything, and questioning orders could get you pushed out overnight. Some said they'd witnessed disturbing behavior, while others insisted they'd seen nothing beyond the standard excesses of celebrity lifelong nights, wild parties, and the kind of chaos that happens when fame mixes with endless resources. The contrast in stories only fueled the mystery, leaving the public trying to piece together who Diddy really was behind the iconic image. Then came the resurfacing of old incidents, some forgotten, some never fully understood. A 1999 nightclub shooting, an infamous video showing violence in a hotel hallway, past disputes with artists, sudden departures from his professional circle. Former bad boy artists and collaborators began sharing their own experiences. Some supportive, some critical, some cryptic. Even if these incidents weren't connected directly to the lawsuits, they shaped the narrative. They painted a picture of a man who had lived for decades in a world where he controlled nearly every detail around him. While these stories circulated, Diddy's legal team pushed back harder, issuing statements that condemned what they called fabricated histories, false accusations, and opportunistic attacks. They emphasized that some stories had changed over time. Some plaintiffs had financial motivations, and others were revisiting interactions from years or decades earlier. They argued that the media frenzy was creating an environment where virtually anything said about Diddy was treated as truth, even when unproven. The defense's message was simple: allegations are not facts, and civil lawsuits do not equal guilt. But the lawsuits kept coming. Each filing came with new details, locations, alleged patterns of behavior, signed statements, and descriptions of people inside Diddy's circle. Some cases were graphic, some emotional. Some described long-term relationships that deteriorated into cycles of control and fear. Others were from individuals who claimed to know Diddy through work, social circles, or industry events. The more plaintiffs there were, the harder it became for the public to ignore the pattern forming in front of them. And there was something else happening, something subtle, but powerful. Other celebrities were beginning to react. Some unfollowed Diddy, others removed old posts. A few issued statements, distancing themselves. In Hollywood, where silence is often strategic, even small moves spoke volumes. Nobody knew where the investigations were heading, and no one wanted to be tied to a scandal that could explode further. But the most dramatic shift happened behind closed doors, inside Diddy's own world. For years, he was the nucleus of a powerful network: artists, producers, assistants, executives, friends. But after the lawsuits and the raids, that network began to thin. People who once stood proudly next to him suddenly grew distant. Some insisted they were stepping back for personal reasons. Others said nothing but quietly separated themselves from his empire. Those who remained loyal were forced into a defensive position, navigating a landscape they weren't prepared for. Diddy himself began operating differently. Public appearances became rare. His once active social media accounts grew quiet. He canceled events, paused business ventures, and remained mostly out of the spotlight. The man who once thrived on visibility now moved in silence, communicating only through statements from his legal team. For someone who built a career on being larger than life, the quiet was deafening. Meanwhile, investigators moved at their own pace. They pulled travel logs, phone records, financial documents, flight manifests, property records, and communications. These were the kinds of materials that can take months or even years to analyze. The public wasn't seeing the work, but that didn't mean the work wasn't being done. The raids signaled that something substantial had triggered federal interest. And although investigators don't reveal what they find until the time is right, the scale of the operation hinted at the seriousness of the inquiry. The entertainment community watched with unease. For decades, Diddy wasn't just an artist, he was a cultural force. His success helped shape modern hip-hop, influence fashion, elevate black entrepreneurship, and redefine celebrity branding. He mentored megastars, launched companies, and built one of the first true entertainment empires of the rap era. He represented ambition, hustle, and relentless drive. To many, he was a symbol of possibility. And that's what made the unfolding scandal so shocking. The fall of someone so powerful doesn't just impact them. It shakes the entire foundation around them. Other executives wondered if more stories might surface from other corners of the industry. Artists questioned how much they didn't know. Journalists dug deeper into archives, old interviews, and forgotten statements. Even veteran insiders, who had seen the darker side of fame, admitted they hadn't expected something this massive. Through all of this, one thing remained unclear: how far the investigations would go. Civil cases were moving through the system. Lawsuits were filed and either settled or ongoing. But the federal inquiry was the wild card. It was slow, methodical, and deliberately quiet. Until prosecutors speak, nobody knows which path they're taking, whether they're gathering evidence for a broader case or whether the investigation would end without charges. But the silence only fueled speculation. Was there more that hadn't been made public? Were insiders cooperating? Had the raids turned up evidence that changed the trajectory of the case? Or were investigators still trying to determine what, if anything, crossed legal lines? The uncertainty became the story. The unanswered questions became the tension. And with every passing month, the world realized something unsettling. Diddy's future wasn't just in the hands of lawyers. It was in the hands of forces, far bigger forces he couldn't charm, negotiate, or intimidate. This wasn't just an industry scandal anymore. This was the slow, methodical unraveling of a legacy. By mid-2024, the Diddy story had become something larger than scandal, larger than celebrity downfall, larger than gossip or trending hash. It had turned into a cultural moment when that forced the public to reconsider how much power a single figure can hold, and how long that power can shape the narrative around them. Every week seemed to bring a new angle, a new voice, a new piece of the puzzle that made the situation feel less like individual accusations and more like a slow-moving earthquake shifting beneath the entertainment industry. The lawsuits continued to stack, each one carrying its own weight. Some were filed in New York, others in California, some in federal jurisdiction, others in state courts. The claims varied, emotional abuse, sex trafficking claims, assault, coercion, harassment, financial manipulation, threats. Some cases were filed under names, others under pseudonyms. And even though every defendant has the right to deny allegations, the sheer frequency of filings created an atmosphere where silence felt impossible. The lawyers representing the plaintiffs moved like seasoned strategists. They weren't rushing, they were patient, methodical, and careful to state that each plaintiff's story stood alone. But taken together, the similarities were hard to ignore. Many described long-term relationships that began with glamour and opportunity, but allegedly deteriorated into cycles of control. Others described short encounters that left a lasting impact. And some told stories of being pulled into a world they had no idea how to escape. For the public, the most shocking part wasn't just the allegations. It was how many people now claimed they had seen something, sensed something, or heard something over the years. Former security guards talked about witnessing explosive arguments. Assistants described chaotic nights and sudden trips. People who once bragged about being in Diddy's inner circle now said being close to him came with an unspoken rule. You never questioned the environment. You kept your head down, did your job, and pretended not to see anything that might cause trouble. Of course, not everyone agreed on what they'd witnessed. Some defended him fiercely, insisting he was being targeted because of his success, his influence, or his money. They claimed the parties were wild but consensual, that the relationships were intense but mutual, that the accusations were exaggerated, rewritten, or completely fabricated. Supporters emphasized the absence of criminal charges, framing the situation as a coordinated attempt to destroy a cultural icon. But whether supportive or critical, one thing everyone agreed on was this: Diddy had lived a life of extreme excess, a life where almost nothing was out of reach. He had the money, the fame, the connections, the network, and when someone lives at the top for decades, they become used to a certain level of control. They get used to being obeyed. They get used to being protected by the people around them. And they get used to a world where there are very few consequences. The rise to fame had been fast and spectacular. From the early days of Bad Boy Records to launching global superstars, Diddy didn't just build a career, he built an empire. That empire powered television deals, fashion lines, spirits companies, festivals, awards, shows, branding partnerships, and real estate ventures. He was a mogul in every sense. His business model wasn't just about music. It was about expanding influence across every corner of entertainment. That influence protected him for years. But now, the walls were cracking. In 2024 and 2025, more and more companies quietly removed his name from promotional materials. Networks paused projects. Charities reconsidered affiliations. Universities and organizations faced backlash for partnerships that once seemed harmless. Nightclubs removed his photos. Venues canceled appearances. Even radio stations debated pulling his music from rotation. Some fans called for fairness and due process. Others insisted that where there's smoke, there's fire. Meanwhile, the raids had triggered something even deeper. When federal agents seize devices, they don't return them quickly. They comb through data, backups, deleted files, financial transfers, encrypted messages, and old communications. The public didn't know what was found, but the length of time investigators held on to the seized items suggested they were still sorting through massive amounts of information. That kind of analysis can take months, even years. Each file revealed could lead to more questions, more interviews, more subpoenas. Inside his circle, paranoia grew. People wondered who was cooperating with investigators. Lawyers received calls from individuals asking for representation just in case they were contacted. Former associates hired their own attorneys preemptively. Publicists began telling clients to avoid being photographed with anyone tied to Diddy's world. The uncertainty around the investigation created a ripple effect that reached far beyond Combs himself. Then, something changed in the culture. The conversation shifted from Diddy as an individual to the larger question of how many powerful people in the music industry had operated with little oversight. Commentators began comparing the moment to other major reckonings. They asked why so many stories had remained whispered instead of reported. They asked whether power and money had made it impossible for people to speak earlier. They asked why the industry had been silent even when signs were visible. And most uncomfortably, they asked who else might be implicated in similar environments. This shift rattled the industry. Executives who had once treated Diddy as untouchable now viewed him with a mix of fear and discomfort. Because if investigators were looking at him, they might look at others. If old stories about Diddy were resurfacing, old stories about others might follow. Scandals don't exist in isolation, they spread. And this one seemed like the beginning of a much bigger conversation. Through all of this, Diddy tried to maintain his version of the truth. He denied the allegations, repeatedly calling them lies and coordinated attacks. He pointed to inconsistencies in plaintiffs' accounts, emphasized his charitable work, and insisted that people were trying to destroy decades of legacy. His representatives argued that the lawsuits were financially motivated and that the public had been manipulated by sensationalized media coverage. but the strategy wasn't working the way it once might have. The world had changed. The culture had shifted. People were far more critical of power, far less forgiving of celebrities, and far more willing to believe survivors. Social media amplified every detail, every rumor, every theory, and while the truth of every allegation remained unproven until tested in a courtroom, the public wasn't waiting for verdicts. Opinions were formed in real time. By late 2024, the entire situation felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. The legal cases were still active. The federal investigation was ongoing. The industry had pulled back. The public was divided, and the man at the center of everything was growing more isolated than ever before. Because once the public questions your innocence, reclaiming your image becomes a nearly impossible task. And for the first time in decades, Diddy was facing a battle he couldn't charm his way out of, negotiate around, or silence with money. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the midpoint. When power begins to crumble and the truth begins to squeeze its way into the light. As 2025 dawned, the intensity surrounding Sean Diddy Combs didn't slow it, accelerated. The media had fully embraced the story, devoting coverage not just to the lawsuits themselves, but to every facet of his life. Past controversies, public appearances, business deals, and relationships. Tabloids, social media, and entertainment news outlets dissected every word, every video, every interview. Every statement from Diddy's legal team was scrutinized. While plaintiffs' stories were replayed endlessly, each retelling adding weight and drama to the narrative. The situation had transformed from a series of isolated allegations into a full-scale cultural reckoning. Civil cases continued to unfold in multiple courts across the country. Each filing brought with it new details, events described in painstaking time, locations ranging from luxury hotel suites to recording studios, and accounts from individuals who claimed to have witnessed or been affected by Diddy's alleged behavior. Some plaintiffs recounted long-term relationships in which they said they were subjected to emotional manipulation, coercion, or intimidation. Others described more fleeting encounters, often framed by promises of career advancement or social opportunity, which allegedly devolved into experiences they found degrading or abusive. While each claim was unique, patterns emerged. Descriptions of control, fear, and power dynamics appeared across multiple cases. Even if not every allegation could be proven in court, the repetition of themes created a compelling public narrative. Diddy's legal team remained aggressive in their defense. They consistently argued that allegations were either false, exaggerated, or motivated by financial gain. They highlighted inconsistencies between plaintiffs' accounts, questioned the timing of filings, and emphasized the absence of criminal charges. Public statements stressed that Diddy had a long history of philanthropy, mentoring, and professional achievement, suggesting that these qualities contradicted the claims of sustained misconduct. Yet, despite these efforts, the court of public opinion remained skeptical. The sheer volume of lawsuits, coupled with media coverage, made it difficult for anyone outside his immediate circle to separate fact from rumor. Meanwhile, his business empire experienced tangible repercussions. Companies that had once been eager to collaborate now hesitated. Music labels reviewed existing contracts, sponsorships were delayed or reconsidered, and partnerships were paused. Some of Diddy's long-standing projects were quietly shelved. Even events and festivals that had historically featured his presence began excluding his participation. The ripple effect extended beyond his personal brand. Collaborators, artists, and employees all felt the pressure of association. Fear of reputational damage, potential litigation, or public backlash made distancing from him the safest course of action for many. Despite the professional setbacks, Diddy maintained a degree of public poise. He rarely spoke in interviews, and carefully curated social media posts painted a picture of continued success and resilience. Behind the scenes, however, sources indicated that his inner circle was smaller and more defensive than ever. Trusted assistants, managers, and advisors became key buffers between him and the outside world. They were responsible for protecting his brand, managing communications, and anticipating potential legal or media challenges. The empire that once seemed untouchable was now relying on a highly controlled defensive strategy. The lawsuits themselves were not monolithic. Some sought financial damages, others requested injunctions or public acknowledgments, and several included detailed personal testimonies intended to document patterns of alleged misconduct. In court filings, plaintiffs described situations where they felt coerced, intimidated, or threatened. Some claimed they were prevented from leaving certain environments, while others said the power imbalance was the most frightening aspect of their interactions with Diddy. Legal experts noted that while these allegations varied in severity and verifiability, collectively they painted a picture of someone whose influence could dramatically shape the lives of those around him. The public response was divided. Longtime fans defended Diddy, citing his contributions to music, fashion, and entrepreneurship. They questioned whether the allegations could truly capture the complexity of his relationships and environment. Critics, on the other hand, argued that even in the absence of criminal charges, the sheer number and similarity of claims could not be ignored. Cultural commentators debated the broader implications of the case, questions about power dynamics, celebrity accountability, and the willingness of institutions to protect individuals in positions of influence. Social media became a battleground of opinion, with trending hashtags, viral threads, and discussions that reached audiences far beyond the traditional entertainment sphere. The psychological and social pressure on Diddy was significant. His personal life, once shielded by fame and controlled narratives, became increasingly public. Interviews with former associates revealed both loyalty and disillusionment. Some described years of trust and collaboration, others described fear and discomfort. These personal accounts, whether verified or anecdotal, contributed to a narrative in which Diddy's legendary charisma was now intertwined with controversy, speculation, and ongoing scrutiny. Even for someone accustomed to the spotlight, this represented a new challenge, navigating a life in which every decision, every interaction, and every statement was subject to intense public evaluation. At the same time, Diddy's influence on popular culture could not be fully erased. He remained a symbol of innovation and ambition in hip-hop and beyond. His music continued to resonate with fans, and his legacy in shaping modern entertainment and business remained intact in many respects. Yet, the lawsuits and investigations cast a shadow over this legacy, creating tension between admiration for his achievements and scrutiny of his alleged personal conduct. The juxtaposition became a recurring theme in media coverage. Can a cultural icon retain public respect when allegations of misconduct loom large? By mid-2025, it was clear that the situation was far from over. Civil litigation would continue to unfold for months, possibly years, as cases were filed, settled, or dismissed. Media coverage would continue to shape public perception, highlighting both factual developments and speculative interpretations. The Diddy brand, long associated with success, wealth, and power, was now navigating a landscape marked by caution, scrutiny, and reputational risk. For his team, the focus remained on managing legal outcomes, protecting assets, and controlling public messaging as much as possible. Yet, despite all the setbacks, Diddy's story was not solely about conflict. It also highlighted the complexity of fame and influence in modern culture. The lawsuits, investigations, and media narratives were intertwined with questions about accountability, power, and privilege. For viewers and followers, it provided a glimpse into the pressures of life at the very top of entertainment. How success can protect, complicate, and ultimately expose even the most iconic figures. It was a reminder that celebrity status brings both unprecedented opportunity and extraordinary vulnerability, and that navigating both successfully requires more than just talent. It requires strategy, support, and sometimes sheer resilience. In this stage of the story, Diddy's position was both precarious and emblematic. He represented the apex of influence and the vulnerabilities that accompany it. The lawsuits continued, the public debated, and the media dissected every new development. Yet, amid the chaos, the larger question persisted. How would a figure of immense cultural and financial power respond to scrutiny, legal pressure, and the changing expectations of society? This period marked a turning point. The cumulative effect of lawsuits, media scrutiny, and industry caution signaled that Diddy's career, while not over, was undergoing a profound transformation. The narrative was no longer defined solely by music, fashion, or entrepreneurship. It was now inseparable from questions about ethics, behavior, and the responsibilities of fame. And in that transformation, the story of Sean Diddy Combs became a cautionary tale as much as a biography, illustrating the delicate balance between power, reputation, and accountability in the modern era. By the latter half of 2025, the world had settled into a tense watchfulness over Sean Diddy Combs. The lawsuits continued to unfold, and with each filing, each deposition, and each settlement, the narrative surrounding him grew more complex. What had once been isolated controversies was now widely understood as a series of interconnected legal battles, each carrying its own weight and collectively shaping public perception. The cumulative effect was clear. Diddy's image, once largely untouchable, had become a point of intense scrutiny. In the music and entertainment industry, reactions were cautious. Collaborators who had once worked closely with Diddy now weighed their association carefully. Some artists delayed projects that involved him. Others quietly removed references to their collaborations in interviews or social media posts. Industry executives reviewed contracts, sponsorships, and partnerships, often seeking legal counsel before committing to anything new. The ripple effect extended beyond Diddy himself, affecting labels, managers, promoters, and brands that had long relied on his influence. The calculus was simple. Even without criminal charges, association with ongoing litigation carried reputational risk. Meanwhile, public discourse intensified. Social media became a relentless arena of debate. Fans, critics, journalists, and cultural commentators dissected every new development. Some defended Diddy, citing his philanthropic work, his mentorship of young artists, and his transformative impact on hip-hop and entrepreneurship. Others criticized him, pointing to the number of lawsuits, recurring allegations, and the broader question of power dynamics in entertainment. The conversation was complex and polarized, highlighting a tension between admiration for his achievements and skepticism about his behavior. In addition to public scrutiny, Diddy faced the personal toll of prolonged legal exposure, living under constant media attention, with civil suits moving through courts in multiple states, placed immense pressure on him and his inner circle. Sources close to him described the emotional strain of navigating ongoing investigations, defending against lawsuits, and attempting to maintain professional operations simultaneously. Trusted advisors, legal teams, and publicists became essential buffers, managing communications, media interactions, and strategic planning to prevent further reputational damage. Even so, the weight of multiple cases, coupled with intense public interest, created a level of stress rarely experienced by anyone outside high-stakes politics or corporate governance. Financial implications also emerged as a major factor. While Diddy's fortune remained significant, legal fees, settlements, and paused projects affected the liquidity of his operations. Advisors reportedly conducted detailed reviews of assets, restructuring where necessary to protect both personal and business interests. This careful financial maneuvering was not unusual for high-profile figures facing civil litigation. But the scale and duration of Diddy's situation added an extra layer of complexity. Every business decision, from new investments to ongoing contracts, required careful consideration of potential legal exposure. The media continued to play a critical role in shaping the story. Coverage often blended verified reporting with analysis, speculation, and contextualization of Diddy's past incidents, such as documented altercations, previous lawsuits, and disputes with collaborators, resurfaced repeatedly. Journalists explored patterns in behavior described by multiple plaintiffs, presenting timelines and narratives that made the alleged incidents feel more concrete to the public. At the same time, the outlets highlighted Diddy's achievements and contributions, creating a complex, nuanced portrait rather than a one-sided condemnation. This approach, while dramatic, underscored the challenge of separating personal actions from professional accomplishments in the public eye. The cultural impact of the ongoing litigation was also evident. Conversations about celebrity accountability, consent, and power dynamics gained prominence. Diddy's case became a reference point in discussions about how influence can shape relationships, career opportunities, and social environments. Commentators examined how fame can insulate behavior from immediate consequences and questioned the role of legal structures, media, and public awareness in holding prominent figures accountable. The discourse extended beyond entertainment, touching on broader societal concerns about ethics, justice, and responsibility. Despite the scrutiny, Diddy's resilience in managing public perception was notable. He maintained a careful balance between visibility and discretion, occasionally releasing curated statements or engaging in high-profile business and philanthropic activities. These efforts, while strategic, reflected an understanding that public narrative could not be ignored. For many observers, this stage of the story highlighted the tension between surviving legal and reputational challenges, while attempting to preserve influence and authority within the industry. Internally, the lawsuits also had an effect on Diddy's professional relationships. Long-term collaborators reassessed their roles, some stepping back entirely, others maintaining limited involvement. Employees and associates who remained loyal were tasked with navigating a delicate environment, where every action could be scrutinized. Loyalty and trust became both more valuable and more fragile. Reports suggested that new hires and partners were thoroughly vetted, with a heightened emphasis on discretion and legal compliance. The organization's internal culture shifted, reflecting a heightened awareness of risk and the consequences of association. The accumulation of lawsuits and scrutiny created a broader narrative about legacy and accountability. Observers noted that Diddy's career, while marked by extraordinary achievement, was now inseparable from questions about personal conduct. His role as a cultural icon, mentor, and entrepreneur was being recontextualized in light of the ongoing allegations. This reframing illustrated a larger societal shift in an era of heightened awareness around power, influence, and personal responsibility. Public figures are increasingly evaluated not only on their professional accomplishments but also on how they conduct themselves in personal and organizational contexts. By late 2025, it became clear that Diddy's story would be studied for years, both as a reflection of his individual choices and as a case study in the complex intersection of fame, power, and accountability. The lawsuits and media coverage had created a lasting impact, influencing how other industry figures approached relationships, business dealings, and public behavior. Legal and cultural scholars alike began analyzing the situation, emphasizing its significance in conversations about celebrity influence, legal responsibility, and societal expectations. Yet, amid all the pressure and scrutiny, Diddy's influence in certain areas remained intact. His music continued to resonate with audiences. His fashion and brand endeavors maintained visibility, and his legacy as a trailblazer in hip-hop and entrepreneurship could not be erased overnight. What had changed was the context in which that influence operated. The narrative surrounding him was now a blend of admiration, controversy, and careful re-evaluation, a story that demanded nuance, critical attention, and ongoing observation. Diddy's saga revealed the multidimensional consequences of sustained scrutiny. Legal challenges, media attention, and public debate created a complex environment where reputation, influence, and personal conduct were all inextricably linked. For Diddy, navigating this landscape required a delicate balance between defending his interests, maintaining his brand, and managing relationships with collaborators, employees, and the broader industry. For the public and media, the story offered a lens through which to explore larger cultural questions about power, accountability, and the responsibilities that come with fame. And as the lawsuits continued to unfold, the message was clear. Legacy is never static. Every action, every allegation, and every response shapes how history will remember a figure like Sean Diddy Combs. What had once been unquestioned acclaim now coexisted with intense scrutiny, illustrating the fragile balance between achievement and accountability in the world of celebrity. As 2025 drew to a close, the narrative surrounding Sean Diddy Combs had evolved from individual lawsuits into a larger story about power, fame, and cultural accountability. The world was no longer just watching celebrity drama unfold. It was observing the consequences of influence in a society, increasingly unwilling to separate personal conduct from public legacy. For decades, Diddy had symbolized ambition, ingenuity, and the art of building an empire from nothing. Now, his story served as a reflection of how even the most celebrated figures must navigate the scrutiny and responsibility that accompany extraordinary visibility. The media continued to dissect every aspect of his life, drawing connections between past controversies, business ventures, and personal behavior. While some coverage leaned toward sensationalism, much of it reflected broader societal questions. How does one balance power with accountability? How does influence shape consent, loyalty, and ethical behavior? What responsibilities do cultural icons carry beyond the stage, the studio, and the boardroom? These discussions transcended Diddy as an individual. They became a mirror reflecting the entertainment industry, celebrity culture, and the dynamics of power in modern society. Meanwhile, Diddy's business operations continued, albeit under heightened scrutiny. Collaborators, partners, and employees were acutely aware of the stakes. Contracts were meticulously reviewed, projects were carefully managed, and any potential liability was weighed against opportunity. While Diddy remained an influential figure, his sphere of operation had shifted. Decisions were no longer guided solely by ambition or creative vision. Legal considerations, public perception, and long-term reputation now played an equal, if not greater, role. This recalibration demonstrated the profound effect that civil scrutiny, lawsuits, and public discourse can have on the operations of even the most powerful entertainment empires. Cultural commentators began framing Diddy's situation as a cautionary tale. It was no longer just about lawsuits, it was about systemic awareness. Discussions emerged in panels, podcasts, and conferences, analyzing the dynamics of influence in creative industries, how power is wielded, how relationships are managed, and how fame can both shield and expose someone became central themes in these conversations. The Diddy case illustrated that influence, when unchecked, can have consequences far beyond the immediate circle of friends and collaborators. More importantly, it underscored the cultural shift toward accountability. Society was no longer content to let celebrity excess go unnoticed or unchallenged. For fans and the public, the story remained a complex mix of admiration, skepticism, and curiosity. Many continued to celebrate Diddy's contributions to music, fashion, and entrepreneurship. Others questioned his choices, emphasizing that influence carries responsibility. The dichotomy became a recurring theme in public discourse. How can society acknowledge someone's accomplishments while also recognizing potential harm? The lawsuits and associated media coverage forced people to consider this question in real time, making Diddy's narrative a case study in the evolving relationship between celebrity, accountability, and cultural perception. On a personal level, the challenges faced by Diddy highlighted the psychological and emotional dimensions of public scrutiny. Living under constant observation, navigating ongoing litigation, and responding to media narratives created unprecedented stress. Even for someone accustomed to the spotlight, this environment required adaptation, resilience, and strategic thinking. Reports suggested that Diddy's team focused not just on legal defense but also on mental and emotional well-being, managing both public-facing communications and internal morale. The balance between personal survival and professional continuity became a delicate operation, illustrating the human side of navigating influence under pressure. Legally, the landscape remained complex. Civil cases continued to be processed across multiple jurisdictions, each with its own procedural rules, timelines, and implications. Some cases were dismissed, others settled, and a few remained active, contributing to ongoing uncertainty. This multi-layered legal environment created a situation where outcomes were unpredictable, yet the attention and scrutiny they generated were immediate and far-reaching. The structure of civil litigation, combined with public awareness, ensured that even in the absence of criminal charges, Diddy's reputation and operations were continually shaped by external forces. Perhaps the most significant impact of the lawsuits and scrutiny was the broader conversation about power and accountability in the entertainment industry. Diddy's situation became a reference point in discussions about professional ethics, mentorship, leadership, and consent. Industry insiders examined how influence could be misused, while cultural commentators debated how accountability mechanisms might be strengthened without stifling creativity or opportunity. In this sense, the Diddy narrative extended beyond one individual. It became a lens for evaluating structures, behaviors, and expectations across an entire sector. For Diddy himself, this period represented both challenge and opportunity. While his public image had been complicated by lawsuits and scrutiny, his professional achievements remained substantial. He continued to influence music, business, and fashion, while navigating a more cautious, calculated path. This duality's significant accomplishment, coupled with heightened accountability, illustrated a broader truth about fame. Influence is never static, and public perception is both fragile and mutable. The story of Sean Diddy Combs in 2025 underscored the evolving reality that personal actions, legal scrutiny, and public narrative are deeply intertwined, shaping not only immediate reputation but long-term legacy. That as the year progressed, the cultural lessons became clearer. Audiences, critics, and industry insiders recognized that even iconic figures must contend with scrutiny, both legal and social. Legacy is not determined solely by past achievement. It is continually reshaped by behavior, public perception, and accountability. Diddy's narrative exemplified the tension between historic success and contemporary evaluation, highlighting the complexity of assessing personal and professional life in a world where fame and influence are constantly visible. And so, as the lawsuits continued, as media coverage persisted, and as public discourse evolved, one overarching theme emerged. The story of Sean Diddy Combs was no longer just about entertainment. It was about power, responsibility, and the ways in which society evaluates influence. It was about the intersections of fame, ethics, and accountability. And it was about the realization that even the most celebrated figures exist within a cultural framework that demands scrutiny, reflection, and ultimately, balance. The lawsuits, public discourse, and industry reactions had created a multidimensional portrait of Diddy not as a single narrative of triumph or controversy, but as a complex figure whose legacy would be continually shaped by both accomplishments and challenges. The story was far from over, but the lessons were clear. Accountability cannot be ignored, influence carries responsibility, and cultural icons exist in a world where perception, scrutiny, and action are inseparably linked. The story of Sean Diddy Combs is far from just headlines. It's a window into the complexities of fame, power, and accountability. Every lawsuit, every allegation, every media report has reminded us that influence comes with responsibility, and that even the most celebrated figures face scrutiny when patterns of behavior emerge. Whether you admire his achievements, question his choices, or simply want to understand the full scope of what's unfolding, this saga offers lessons that go beyond celebrity gossip. It's about culture, ethics, and the fragile balance between legacy and accountability. If you've been following the journey, now is the time to reflect. How does society measure success when it collides with controversy? How do power, wealth, and fame shape behavior and perception? And what does it mean for the future of the entertainment industry when figures like Diddy are held under the spotlight for both accomplishments and allegations? We want to hear your thoughts. Comment below with your perspective on Diddy's legacy. Share this video with friends who follow music and culture. And subscribe for more in-depth stories that explore the world behind the headlines. The story continues in Your Voice Matters in this conversation.